Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jason Karpf. I'm a Christian sci-fi author. I'm proud to say that my novel, The Deliverer, won a prize at last year's Angel Book Awards, and I am delighted to be here as your panel moderator today. Our theme, speculative fiction. That's the big umbrella term for fantasy and sci-fi. But we immediately come to find that there are many, many subdivisions therein after that big fork in the road, fantasy and sci-fi, and not to say that they don't intermingle amongst themselves. But speculative fiction is such a rich realm. It's that way by its very nature, taking storytelling to its most imaginative, dare I say, far-fetched reaches. We're not done yet. This is Christian speculative fiction. How can you mix them? Very well, I answer. And we have four wonderful authors today who do just that. And I am delighted to introduce them to you. Going in alphabetical order by first name, Mr. Chuck Richardson. Chuck writes speculative fiction with a Christian worldview and blogs about the Bible. He is a former technical writer and newspaper freelance writer. Next, Cheryl McClamroc. Cheryl is an author, business owner, and ordained minister and speaker. As a student of the Word, she is passionate about seeing people know God deeply while finding true freedom and wholeness in life through Jesus, the Messiah. Johanna Frank. Before she started writing, Johanna spent her days with profit and nonprofit organizations while spending her evenings studying theology part-time. Now she spends her waking hours creating fantastical stories she hopes will touch the lives of her readers. Her goal? To deliver soulful, whimsical, and venturous reads. Our fourth author today, Mr. Mark David Pullen. Mark is the author of the award-winning middle grade series, The Oasis Chronicles. His first book, The Oasis King, received a Pencraft Literary Award and an honorable mention in the New York State Book Festival. Well, welcome to our panel of authors today. And we'll just take them in order. I've got the same general question for each of the four of you. Chuck will be starting with you. Tell us about yourself and your featured book, Chuck, True Status. And within this, very importantly, tell us how you became an author of Christian speculative fiction.
All right. Thank you. It's great to be here with you, Jason. And, really, it grew out of my desire as a teacher of the Bible. And I'm really interested in education and teaching people. And I started sometimes using some fiction in trying to teach people in the Bible. But I never really thought about creating a novel until my daughter got involved in a creative writing class and asked me to, and that encouraged me to write a story. And she asked me what happens in this short story and ended up leading to a novel, True Status. And so I was excited when I actually got it published last year. And it's really about a man who is skeptical about God, who has some problems with God and doesn't trust God. And he's confronted by an angel who challenges him to look at his own life and not accuse God of wrongdoing. And he also discovers a message on his body that leads him into kind of a search for what's going on. But really, it grew out of the desire to be able to teach biblical concepts. And what I had to learn in I think I did learn is how to make that not a lesson, but an interesting story.
Well, that's a wonderful build up to where you are today as an author and the benefit that you give all of us as readers. I want to call out something Chuck said about teaching lessons without hitting people over the head. What's the
Right.
first thing that people think about with Christian media? Well, I think one of the
Preachy,
words, preachy.
preachy.
Yes.
Yeah,
Heaven help us. But at the same time, watered down, I think Jesus said something about being lukewarm, and that's not going to work. So we really see walking that fine line. And Chuck, you brought that into terrific focus. Thank you so much. Cheryl, Cheryl McClamroc's going to tell us about the waking
Yeah.
and herself and her path to being a Christian spec fiction author, speculative fiction. And Cheryl, I want to give you a shout out for that incredibly cool background. I love it.
Thanks, me too. Well, I appreciate being here just so much and being among fellow writers and fellow Christian fantasy sci-fi authors. I think it's so cool. And so how I got into writing speculative fiction is I've always been a big fan of C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, and I love how Lewis talked about teaching teaching about Jesus through a back door, and the back door being story. And I love story, I love adventure, I love fantasy. And how cool is it that you can interweave a great story with a lesson about having an incredible relationship with Jesus? And so I interwove a story, kind of a mix between Avengers with Jesus being Nick Fury. Um, just kind of a broad sense of that. All of my characters have special powers. They wake up in another realm with, dressed in superhero costumes with powers, and they're wondering what the heck is going on. And they're learning about their environment. They're coming in contact with evil enemies and understanding that the enemies that they are facing physically are also enemies that they are dealing with spiritually in their own lives. Their struggle with their relationship with God, their struggle with their own identity. Who am I? Their destiny. What does God have planned for me? Do I have a purpose? And inner healing as well. Going through life wounded, even as Christians, sometimes we spill over onto other people negatively out of our own wounding from our past. And so I deal with a lot of these lessons interwoven in a fun fantasy story that's right now in two parts. Hopefully we'll have a 3 and a 4 later on. But it's fun with intermingling lessons about destiny, identity, and who is Jesus? Who is he and who is God in your life? So that was my main focus, is how do I present a fun, non-cringy story, but presenting these lessons interwoven in that story and giving you something to leave with, how to pray for inner healing, how to seek God for my own personal destiny and things like that.
Wonderful. Couple of things come to mind. Cheryl brought up a little something some of you may have heard of, the Marvel Universe. Yes, I think we've all heard of this. And that certainly informed, just to jump in here, my personal path to being a Christian speculative fiction author. Out in the lobby of church, I find the other gray-haired fellas along with me talking about the latest Marvel movie. I find my students in public speaking class when they have to do their group project. So many of them pick the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And then I get to say, I know a little boy back in the 60s who was reading those comic books, and if it wasn't for him, you wouldn't have the, yeah, they get it. So, I think this is a terrific touchstone for us as readers and authors of Christian speculative fiction to see how popular works like this are. And we're talking our Christian neighbors and friends and children. It's here, it's healthy. So I just wanted to punctuate what you had to say about Jesus is Nick Fury. I'm so there. I love it. But these are the wonderful factors at play that I have found, and obviously our other authors are finding. This is terrific stuff. Johanna, you're on deck. Tell us about your latest book, how it relates to your other books, and a bit about yourself and your path to becoming a Christian speculative fiction author.
Okay, fun time. My name is Johanna Frank. That's actually my pen name, so I always feel a little bit fraud when I say that. I used the name from my great-great-grandmother, and actually I've never met her, of course, but I just hope that she's okay that I'm using her name. So we're going to go with that. I've always had this crazy, wild imagination. I think my parents used to think I used to lie a lot because I had different worlds going on in my head growing up. But big story is I've just had this huge saga, this setting, these characters in my head for such a long, long time, ever since I can remember. So finally now, breathing life into the characters, they're getting out of my head and onto the paper. So that's pretty cool. A little bit about me. I've been married to my husband for 25 years. It's our second marriage. We merged families, and I could write a book about that, but my kids would probably kill me if I did. He had two girls. I have two girls and a boy. Pretty tricky and challenging, but a lot of prayerful times. We got through it, and we are a single unit now, but we've had some pretty serious trauma. We've lost 2 of those 5 children along the way because of cancer. My youngest daughter, osteosarcoma, and then just last year, my stepdaughter, breast cancer. So, I probably look at life a lot differently with a different point of view. I know that deep, earthy, black pit of grief probably more than I feel like I should. But I also know that, thanks be to God, that sun streaming, blue sky, joyous feeling that we have, and that's part of our life. We have 8 grandchildren. We dote on them, and so we feel totally, totally blessed. So that's a little bit about me. I think about 5 years ago, I had enough. I worked in the corporate world, and then I left that and joined a Christian charity thinking, oh, this is going to give me what I want, something with more meaning. It didn't quite do it for me. And with a lot of prayerful thought, I ended up, quitting and retiring early. And I pulled out all of that big long saga that had been in my head for years. And that's when I started writing. And that's when a Lifeline fantasy series was born. And so the first book was The Gatekeeper's Descendants. Then it was Jophiel's Secret. And then my new one is Here Lieth. And kind of like Star Wars, I'm going back in time with Here Lieth to show it's at the beginning of the series. But my goal with this series was really to sprinkle and plant some seeds and to nurture seeds of curiosity. I just found in my world, there are just so many people around who have that belief that sure, there's a heaven and there's probably a divine being. Maybe, who knows, if we're good, we're going to get there. Ha ha, que sera, sera. We'll find out when we die. And that is kind of the mind frame. And I feel that can be quite a dangerous mindset. And so through these books, I wanted to share, shine the light a little bit on physical death and the promise of life afterwards. So it's kind of an opener to that to open somebody's mind with that, probably, and it's suitable for, I would say, 14 years up to any age. But I had to do it without preaching. And, it obviously had to be adventure and entertaining. So, but I'd like to think my books appeal to the secular readers, and also Christian fiction readers. So that's a little bit about where I'm at. Here lieth. I can tell you a little bit about the book. I don't actually have one yet because they're not delivered, but that's what the cover looks like. The playground is sort of the outer courtyard of a kingdom high above the earth. So it's an allegory of the outer courtyard of heaven, right? That's sort of where a lot of the settings are. And there are arrivals who are coming on a regular basis, people who have just finished their earth journey for whatever reason, they're arriving. There's a sense of busyness and a sense of business because they have to be processed. And of course, there's talking flowers and wonderful aromas and all that stuff. And there is a king who doesn't actually take a role, but he has kingdom authoritarians who take their lead and their direction from the king. So that's kind of the setting. And the plot is there's a young lad, and this goes back in 1600s in a Germanic village. He's been abused his whole life. No sense of worth because he's been abused. He has no trust. And so he gets to this outer courtyard and he doesn't really want to believe it or doesn't want to trust anyone. And instead he, would rather believe in the rebels who lie to him and encourage him to sort of sabotage the future descendants of their line. So that's in a nutshell.
Magnificent.
I needed to.
No, we're here to get deep.
Okay.
We're writers, readers,
Okay.
and everyone's a fan.
So it's kind of a coming of age, spiritual, supernatural Christian fantasy.
Beautiful. A couple of things I want to talk about. Annie and I have a blended family too. And we've been together 20 years, and she brought me to the Lord. So
Nice.
a lot of good things happen when you when God takes you on that path, and you have a second chance for happiness and to build a different kind of family. I just wanted to weigh in on that.
Amen.
And tremendous world building. I hope you were all paying attention. I mean, we know. I love the world anvil that was discussed in the last session. Boy, I'm going to run over there and start pounding on it. I didn't know about that. That sounds fun. Hey, real quick, Chuck and Cheryl, because we've had this question, and Mark, we're about to get to you. What age range for your books? What ages are suitable? Go ahead, Cheryl.
My books are about 14 plus as well.
Gotcha.
I would say primarily adults, but also like mature teenagers could benefit, I think, as well, could enjoy it as well.
Terrific. Well, that answers that. And Johanna, you had mentioned an age range already in a second ago, so we're good there. Mark, you know the drill. Tell us about yourself, your latest book, and your path to becoming a Christian speculative fiction author.
Sure. So my name is Mark David Pullen. I'm an author of middle grade speculative fiction. So that's ages 8 to 14. And I got into writing because, to be quite honest, I got bored reading my son to sleep. So I sat down and I put pen to paper and I decided I'm going to write a story that's going to keep the adults equally as engaged as the kids. So if the kid's being put to bed and he says one more chapter, the parent might go, yeah, I think one more chapter will do. So that's a little bit of my story. I've always been a daydreamer with a vivid imagination. It's gotten me into quite a bit of trouble throughout my life, but now here at the ripe old age of 36, it's probably my favorite hobby and probably the biggest thing that God has done in my life so far, besides being a parent and a husband. And so my story, Freedom Through the Narrow Gate, is my second book in my Oasis King Chronicles series. And it's all talking animals, mice and rats and all sorts of woodlands creatures on this wild and crazy adventure. And the overall theme of my story, so I'm big, like I said, my best job besides being an author is being a dad and a husband. So all of my stories feature that deep family bond. And the overall arcing theme through my series is, with the repentant heart, there can always be forgiveness.
Amen.
Amen.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, let's face it, parents, that read me a story time, sometimes it can be a real slog, even if you're picking those 5-minute stories or stuff. My son reads my grandson to sleep with Ray Bradbury. Now, who's been pulling strings there? Okay. I'm just saying, there's a lot of work to be done in this critical area of reading kids to sleep. I love it. Something else that I see here. So, and thank you all for your varied and vivid descriptions of your path to writing what you write. And I want everyone here to take heart. Note the different paths. Note the professional standing of people and their decisions. Also, if I may say, note the age range. And I'm not talking about anyone in particular. Your friendly host here is turning 63, okay? And I changed my life just before my 60th birthday by saying I want to write and speak for the Lord, and I want to write what I've always loved, science fiction. So I want everyone to grab a piece of that. I don't care if you're 21 or 22. Any time is the right time. Any path is the right path. And our wonderful authors have just now reinforced that. And if there's anything you take away from this panel, let it be that lesson. Let's talk about lessons, shall we? We've heard mentioned Jesus, the master storyteller, Jesus teaching in parables. All of us as writers and readers and fans, we can appreciate it. Speculative fiction, fantasy and sci-fi, can teach lessons that are wrapped up in fantastical stories. Personal hero of mine, Rod Serling, developed the classic TV series The Twilight Zone over 60 years ago to deliver messages about prejudice, censorship, oppression that the cautious networks in the 50s wouldn't touch. Serling went on the record to say, I want to talk about important things. Every time I tried it in a standard story, it got thumbs down. What if I turned it into science fiction and slipped it in there? And he succeeded. Two writers that are often cited in our circles, C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, present biblical themes in their great works, The Chronicles of Narnia, the Lord of the Rings. Now, to these examples, I'm going to ask our authors, how can speculative fiction be a vehicle for Christian truths? We talked about the P word, preachy. We don't want that. But we still have a godly mandate to, as Christian authors, to write Christian stories. How do you write your speculative fiction books to teach these lessons, to glorify God? I'm going to go in reverse order. Mark, you waited longest to speak. You get to speak first this time.
Sure. So this is a great question. I think it's very important that we write some pretty fantastical stuff, like you said, like all of our stuff, talking animals, planets beyond the stars, time travel, all of that. I think it's important that we weave that God thread very finely through the story. I write my stories so that if it's being picked up by a Christian child, they can see the values. They can see and they can know that what I'm writing about, they can see, Christ in my deity figure. But for a child that may not be saved or may have questions, I heard an interesting quote at a writers' conference, and that's as Christian writers, our job isn't necessarily to lead people to Christ, right? Because that gets preachy. You don't want to be preachy in our stuff. But so our job isn't necessarily to lead them to Christ. It's to write the story and trust God to meet them where they are as they read it. And I think that's important. So it's very important for us as believers to know our path, both spiritually and in our writing, and to be able to weave that God thread very finely through our stories.
Well put. And I like what you say. It's in the Lord's hands.
Yes.
We're being his hands and feet, his storyteller. But again, it has to be that coming together. I like that. Johanna, how do you address Christian truths and your particular brand of speculative fiction being a vehicle for them?
Well, first I'd like to say ditto.
Ah!
Because what he just explained was, bang on, perfect. I like to use supernatural elements as sort of metaphors for like real life struggles. So, for example, I have this, river of times in the book, it's called, and it's clear waters that come from the heavens that source it, and, muddy, dirty waters that sort of creep up from the bottom and sort of make things messy. So for these little stones that are traveling along, when it's messy, they bump into the curb or in the bank and they get stuck. And while this is happening, or somebody's watching this at the same time, the protagonist who's on earth gets stuck, because whether it's bullying or grief or something has sort of made them not move forward in their lives. And so the idea of seeing things clearly, helps you to get to the middle of the river and kind of keep flowing and continuing with their life. So I try to use metaphors to, and I use a little bit of biblical allegory, but I stretch it. And it's the same thing. I think that if there were somebody who was a Christian and they were familiar and they're reading it, they would get it. They understand it. Oh yeah, that's kind of cool. And somebody who wasn't would just kind of plant some seeds. And that's all I'm trying to do, is just be curious, think, let that seed nurture it a little bit and let it grow, and do some searching on your own. I'm not pretending to be, a preacher telling you this is what the Bible says. I'm just trying to, shake things up a little bit.
That's right. Let's shake things up. Even if we do it just a little bit,
Yeah,
it can have great results. And in a world that is so scared and safe, I believe we're here to be change agents, to use that phrase. Cheryl, give us your thoughts on imparting Christian truths.
Well, such great answers from this panel. I'm in awe. But I'm that person who loves, and I weave it into my books, the whole thing about implying a message that's deeper than what the surface is. And I think Jesus taught that way, of course, with his parables. And I'm a dreamer, and I feel like God speaks to me in my dreams. And when I wake up, the dream isn't normally literal. God speaks in symbology, colors and names, and the objects, I'm driving a car and it's a symbol of my life, me driving, whether it's my ministry or my job, and who's in the passenger seat, who's driving, where am I going? What's the name of that road? And so I use a lot of that in my books. Of course, people are always waking up and they're dreaming, and the Lord is speaking to them in their dreams, and it's not always straightforward. Sometimes they gotta pray, or they have to figure things out, because God is not one who just says, here, this is what it means. He wants us to find him in the process, find him in the seeking, and find what he's trying to say through those things. So I wove that into the story, those ways of finding God in the nuanced symbols or colors or names, and it's I loved putting the puzzle pieces there for people to put together on their own. They might have found them, they might not have. So maybe they can go back for a second read and find out some more.
Very good. And have a real good time doing it. That's the one
Yeah.
thing we all have to remember as storytellers. Yes, we have so many things we need to accomplish. But let's give the people a good time. Chuck?
Yes, Jason, just want to let you know that my first book came out last year, and it was 3 months after I retired. And I'm older than you are.
Well, that's not fair. You sure don't look it.
66.
Six.
Wow.
Well, you do have me beat, and I never would have guessed.
All right.
Let it be known, writing Christian speculative fiction makes you young.
Yes.
Yes.
I won an award for being the oldest too. But anyway, I think regarding your question, I didn't really realize I was writing speculative fiction until after my book came out and got classified as Christian fantasy. And part of that is when you look at the Bible, there's so many fantastic things, supernatural things in it. And there's so many things that raise questions and are things to think about. Like one example I was thinking about in I give my, as Cheryl said, visions. In my book, I gave my character a vision, and it was a terrifying vision, but that vision grew out of a parable Jesus told about the dragnet. When, he's gathering these, workers are gathering these fish, and they're separating them. So part of what, I did in that instance was give him a vision where he is actually in that parable. And he stumbles upon it basically, and he's trying to understand what's going on. And after he wakes up, he talks to his friend who is a Christian and says, "There's nothing like that in the Bible, is there? That was terrible," because people are getting these fish are going into baskets, or they're going into furnaces and ovens. So it's a terrifying thing. Yet what Jesus was teaching was true. And I think that's the thing that I like, and it turns out to be fantasy, but to me it reflects the truth that the Bible reveals. So this character was motivated to say, did Jesus really say something so terrible? And other things happened to him. And other things, there's so many incredible things are things that would challenge our thinking that happen in the Bible, that we start thinking about that, and stories can grow out of that. Just like, why did Satan rebel? And did he know he couldn't win? Like, what was his psychology? But those things can help us to, I think, as we try to present biblical truth, we kind of take what the Bible tells us, but then we kind of imagine things that it doesn't exactly say. And what we want to try to do is still present God in a way that presents God in a biblical way, in an honest way, even though we're filling in and making up certain details that we're not told.
Indeed, the Bible is God's living word and truth, but how it lays on our hearts and what we do about it, that's highly personal. So I think these are very good points. We're going to do a lightning round on a question here. I find this very important in speculative fiction when you've got your particular specialty, following the rules of it. So you're writing a story that is in the groove. I'm a musician. You can see my bass back there. I'm going to go first on this just to give you an example of what I'm looking for. I write what's known as hard sci-fi. That's a subgenre that stresses the hardware, the technology. Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke, two sci-fi legends, specialized in this format where they described every nut and bolt of every spaceship, and they knew what they were talking about because they were both scientists. I'm no scientist, but I know several. And so I make sure that in writing hard sci-fi, I get a lot of technical detail because readers of it want it. and I do a lot of research. And the last part of this, how do we make it Christian? I hit people over the head. I have overt Christian characters. My first book, Brimstone 1, about the first Christian rocket, an evangelical Romana Clef of Elon Musk builds it and launches it from his giant ranch. That's my answer. Let's go through, identify your sub or subgenre and the rules of it and how you abide by those rules. In no particular order. Johanna.
I would call mine a low-level fantasy because there's half the book is like a real element, like there's real families, real they're going through real struggles, and the other part is this this world where after death, where the souls are in the outer courtyard. My rule is nothing. I don't write anything about what's on the other side of that gate because I feel that it's too sacred. I feel like I have enough of a playground, to pretending what could happen on this side. And so people might come and go in and out of it, but I don't pretend to know what's on the other side. And I do have rebels, but who are, rather than calling them demons and Satan, there are rebels, an army of them. And there's a space beast. So I sort of make sure that that has to be part of it because that vies for one's mind of those who are walking the earth.
I
get
rules. That. You set up those guardrails and where your particular specialty needs to be authentic. Very important in this arena. Cheryl.
Yeah.
Your subgenre and the rules that you make sure that you follow.
Oh, so I think I'm like an adventure / fantasy. I'm definitely not high fantasy. I didn't create my own world with its own, rules and whatnot, and its own magic. My characters go from our real modern world into alternate realms that the Lord brings them into. And so I stick pretty close to a few alternate realms, kind of dipping into the supernatural realm with angels and demons and what Satan and his minions plan behind the scenes, intermingled with how it affects our supposed real worlds and possible multiple alternate realms out there. So
gotcha. You can see you can only go crazy in a speculative story when you got the rules set. I find that order is key. Mark, tell us your subgenre and how you go about it.
Sure, I do fast-paced action adventure with a dash of high fantasy, and I deliver on that because I try to incorporate strange fantastical creatures, strange fantastical places, and the fast-paced action adventure, my stories, it's exhausting to write because the minute I start, I don't stop. Chapters end on cliffhangers. It's danger lurking around every corner. So once you start my stories, I've been told it's very hard to put them down. So it's people are thankful that they're short reads.
What a terrible habit to have as a writer. A story you can't put down. We'll talk later. Heaven's sakes. Chuck, your subgenre and the rules that your stories abide by to honor that subgenre.
I would say mine also is low fantasy because it deals with real, kind of like what you would think is a real world, but it does include those input from angels and demons. He does have visions and does see those things, but a lot of it's in his mind, is how he is reacting and how he's thinking about it. And then what I also do is ultimately these things are what motivates him to actually read the Bible for the very first time in his life. And to kind of keep that balance, I have different types of people, including an atheist who I got basically information from an atheist website about his perspective. So I try to balance it where people are discussing these things after they go to a class and they have dinner together. They're all kind of coming at it from their different perspectives. Some of them are like, a young earther Christian, and then there's a more scientifically based person who believes, and then you have the atheist, and so it's a variety of people. And basically, I'm using the supernatural to drive the character to actually see what the Bible says, and he's never done that before.
Well, that's what happens when you take a step to the other side, and that's the wonderful the wonderful energy and purpose of speculative fiction for Christian stories. Ladies and gentlemen, we're up against our time limit. There's so much more to talk about, and I imagine questions continuing, but I know we've got the big wrap up for our festival that we need to get on to. And I want to give a hand to our wonderful authors today. Yeah, you can clap on a Zoom call. It's fine.
And thank you, Jason.
Great, thank you.
My blessing to be here. Support your speculative author in Christian publishing, would you please? Anyway, time to return to the main room for the big wrap up of our book festival. God bless everyone.